Good afternoon, everyone. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. We seem to have at least something of a quorum here. And there we go. Very cool. Welcome, everybody, to the session to discuss the Internet telecommunication regulations and the upcoming World Conference on International Telecommunications. I think this will be a lively discussion in the tradition of the last day and a half, and so we're going to get right into it. And I first just want to welcome everybody and thank you for attending. The way that I'm going to moderate this session is I'm going to give you just a very quick overview of the ITRs and what, sort of frame the discussion a little bit. I would also direct you to the website of this conference. There is quite an excellent background paper on the WICET and on the ITRs that will give you a little bit more information. And then I will turn it to our panelists. We'll try to keep opening remarks to about 5 to 7 minutes apiece, and then really leave the discussion open for questions and hopefully dialogue with all of you about your views on the ITRs and on perhaps the direction that the Indian government should go as they consider their position for this important conference. So just very briefly, and again, I'll just remind you that the website for the conference has full information on all of our speakers. But just to briefly introduce everyone, we have Mr. Narain, who is the Deputy Director for Security for the Department of Telecommunications for the Government of India. Mr. Matthews is the Director General of the Cellular Operators Association of India. Mr. Michael Kende is the co-head of the regulatory sector of Analysis Mason, which is an economics analysis company. Mr. Upal is the director for ComFirst, which is a consultancy company based in Delhi, and he'll speak to us from the perspective of the ISPs. Mr. Eric Loeb is the vice president of international external affairs for AT&T. Mr. Chandra is the general secretary of the Free Software Movement of India. And Mr. Prakash is the policy director for the Center for Internet and Society. So we have a big panel, an important topic. And so what I thought I would do just very quickly is ask the room how many of you are familiar with the international telecommunication regulations, and how many of you are familiar with the upcoming WICET. Okay, very good. So we have, I think, a group of people who can have a very good discussion. But just to bring everyone up to speed a little bit, the International Telecommunication Regulations is obviously an international treaty. It sets out obligations for the member states that sign it. The last time this treaty was negotiated was in 1988 in Melbourne. The treaty is housed within the International Telecommunication Union, but I do think it's important to note that the provisions of the treaty itself set obligations for the member states that sign it. And the treaty is essentially was written and developed to set the framework for the exchange of international telecommunications traffic across borders. 1988 was the last time it was revised, but it has been revised over time, dating back to the 1800s. So it's quite an old treaty. It has a lot of roots in the communication sector. And in recent years, governments have decided that it was time to update the international telecommunication regulations in light of the changing communications environment. So a process has been undertaken. It has been going on for some time, and it will culminate. Oops, I think I did that. It will culminate this year in the World Conference on International Telecommunications in Dubai, where governments will decide what revisions will be necessary to the international telecommunication regulations. The results of, again, that treaty conference will ultimately be binding upon the member states. One of the questions that has come up in the context of this treaty negotiation and the preparations for the conference is to what extent should new technologies, in particular, to what extent should the Internet be included in the treaty? To what extent should this treaty extend the scope of the regulations to include Internet traffic? This has not been decided. Obviously, governments will decide this at the treaty conference itself, but this has been one of the overarching themes of much of the press and much of the dialogue around the wicket for the last year or so. One of the questions that I think is important for this conversation and for this meeting is what is the position of the Indian government? What should be the position of the Indian government on these important issues? And as I understand it, and we'll hear from the Deputy Director, the Indian government is looking very carefully at the proposals, looking at where the Indian government wants to position itself. And so this is an important point in the dialogue to ask some very important questions about what should be the scope of this treaty going forward. Issues that have come up in the context of the wicket include cybersecurity, spam, to what extent should the treaty apply to content issues, interconnection policies, fraud, number misuse, and there's quite a lengthy list, but that's just a few of the issues that have come up in the context of the treaty proposals that we've seen thus far. Just listening a little bit to the discussion over the last day, there was a question raised the other day about whether we're seeing a tension between multilateralism and multi-stakeholderism. I think this conference raises an interesting data point in that discussion. This is a member state treaty negotiation. The impacts of this treaty negotiation could have far-reaching effects on Internet users around the world. From the Internet Society's perspective, we've long said that Internet issues should be discussed in a multi-stakeholder environment. So this tension between multilateralism in a treaty context and multi-stakeholderism when it comes to Internet governance, I think, is coming to a head a little bit in this conference. Just to be clear, I come from the Internet Society. We do have views on this treaty. We've made those views known. We aren't a disinterested party. We are concerned about the expansion of the scope of the treaty to include the Internet. We've been clear on that. But one of the things we've been extremely clear on is the need for there to be national dialogue on this topic, the need for there to be a conversation at the national level to help inform governments as they go off to negotiate this important treaty. So while Internet Society has clear views on the topic, I think our most important view is that these kinds of discussions are incredibly important as we go into the wicket, and they're happening around the world. And hopefully what that will do is empower governments in a way that's constructive to make good policy decisions that support the growth of communications and connectivity worldwide. A little bit of maybe a shameless plug, but I put some resources up here in case you're interested in learning more about the topic. The first one is you can actually download the treaty for yourself. It's 15 pages or so. It's not terribly long. And the website to that is there. The International Telecommunication Union has a website to give you a lot of information about the treaty and about the conference, and you can find that there. IFOC has done quite a bit of work on background and various issues that we think are at stake in the conference. And then there's a number of sites that look at some of the press that's coming out. The other thing that I would note, if I knew how to use this, which I don't, let's see. You can submit public comments to the process. And I would encourage you, as you think through these things and as you listen to the debate, to take note of this. The ITU has not done this in the past, but there is a comment process, and maybe this is something that some of you want to avail yourselves of. So I just wanted to make that point to the room. And with that, I am done with my remarks. And I am going to turn now to the Deputy Director General and ask for you to make a few remarks as we start the panel discussion, and then we'll turn it over to questions.
Thank you, Sally. I thought you will ask me last to talk on this, but but nevertheless, you have given me this onerous task. I'll talk on this. Sally and my co-panelist and a very learned audience here. The audience is very learned, and in fact, I will have very little to say on. I will have little to add to their knowledge, but still, few points I would like to make on this issue. Then there is an old saying which says, old system changes, yielding place to the new, lest one good system corrupt the whole world. The change is life. So unless we change things, unless we move forward, then we stop. So this is a FICCI is an event which is going to have probably far-reaching consequences. The way we regulate communication, the way we communicate, and on the internet as such. Existing ITRs, the regulations, people see them mostly as if they are for the settlement rate. And actually, predominantly they are about that, because that was the issue then. But today, issue may not be the same. But still, we will continue to talk internationally. And when we talk internationally, naturally, then we'll have to some set ground rules. Because completely unregulated for some time, it could be good, and sometime, say, even from very old history, there was no regulation into the societies. People were going around, and still the progress has taken place in the civilization, and we have come to this far. But then a point comes when certain ground rules you set. That is for the society to decide to what extent we regulate things, so that we optimize the solutions. By definition, regulation means that certain kind of things which we must follow. That's the definition. Regulation means I am regulating it. I am telling, or some authority is telling, this is how it will be regulated. There could be recommendations. Recommendations is a set of principles which are recommended. Okay, if you do it, then it is good for the society, it is good for the institution, it is good for the countries. Whereas regulation is mandatory, recommendations are not, in general. Say, for example, ITU had been given recommendations on the standards by and large, but on few areas, like settlement rate and other things, it's a regulation. The internet is throwing new challenges. The resource allocation, the paradigm has shifted. In the old telecommunication times, the resources, whether they are numbering resources, whether they are switches, whether they are transmission systems, they were located into the geographical boundaries of the countries, and it was very easy to control those physical resources. So there was no necessity of any international regulation as such, but regulation used to be there at the national level for that also. But with the coming of the internet, this resource allocation whether they are intangible resources or they are tangible resources. The intangible resources comes in terms of the naming and numbering, and tangible resources comes in terms of the location of the servers and the root servers, domains servers, and the service providing servers or the content servers. So, not necessarily what was applicable into the olden ITR or in the ITR of 1988 would be applicable in the new, but something could be there. This, what could be there, can only be decided, we believe, unless we see internet, we analyze internet. Today, internet is being talked about as a one bucket, okay? But internet has many large processes and systems. It has got many components. Broadly, the internet protocol addresses is one component. Say for example, today, if we talk about IPv4 addresses, in India, we have a very small number of the IP addresses, whereas in US, I think it's 27 or 28% of the total resources. Here, we have got only 0.18% or something like that. Very small number of the resources. So these resources historically have been allocated as and when the society kept developing. So the resources they were allocating. So whoever came afterwards, so whatever were left, so it was taken up. But that time the internet was evolving at its own. But today the internet has become a fait accompli. It is there to stay, and everyone has to use those resources. So can we rely on the similar kind of the system as it was existing? Maybe in that case we will be stopping the growth of the internet in that case. Although we have devised a roundabout system, a better system, that IPv6, so that addresses will never exhaust. So maybe the problem will not come, but it is not because of the principle. The principle still may be flawed, but because we have found out a system where the resource is available in so much abundance quantity that the likely shortage is not there, but still some sort of control may be required. Then the root servers are there. Then the service providing servers are there, or content servers. Then how do we route the traffic? Because this is one of a very big challenges for the security agencies, because in the internet we never know how the traffic is moving, what packet is going from here, another packet is going from here, and it's collated at the other end. So fundamentally there may not be any harm in having a mechanism, but as if I want to go from here to Bombay, it is possible for me. I can go via Ahmedabad or I can go via Bhopal also. That's fine. But at least somebody should be knowing that how I'm going about it. Okay. Then we have the protocols. Internet protocols are there. They have to be studied. There are weaknesses in those internet protocols. And the last but not the least, which mostly we focus on, that's the content. So content is only one part of it. But there are many systems and components of the internet systems, and it is not necessarily all these systems and components will be governed by one entity. Maybe we need several institutions, club them together in two or three groups. Maybe ITU can deal with certain kind of issues like routing plan, protocol strengthening, etc., which involves standards. On the other hand, the allocation of internet protocol addresses, management, control and regulation, and the root servers and service providing servers may have to be dealt by some multilateral agencies, or multi-stakeholder mechanism may have to be created. And for content, it's a different ballgame. We may have to have a different forum for this, because it is not only technical issue, it is more of a legislative issue also. It involves rule of law enforcement for contentment. So all this gambit we have to deal with. We can't deal all the parts with the same stick. And if we devise such a mechanism, we feel that we will be better off on the issue. As far as the government is concerned, this issue I got started heating up just now, in fact. I think although these wickets are for deliberations for quite long time, but really the heat has come only recently and people have warmed up to this issue only recently. So we are having internal debates and other things. The different ministries are being involved, and a very considerate view would be taken, a very pragmatic view will be taken in this regard. People may feel that see, generally what they say is bureaucrats are ignorant or they are power hungry and other things. But today, I can assure you, the Department of Telecom is headed by a very efficient officer who would take a reasoned stand, keeping the international, keeping the national interest with international perspective. So whatever we come out, so I think it will meet those needs. And because I have already got the slip, 1 minute. So therefore, better I stop here. So that's broadly my views are on this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to the Deputy Director General. And we will come back to you perhaps at the end for some concluding remarks. I'll turn now to Mr. Matthews, the Director General of the Cellulars Operation Association from India, who can perhaps give us the perspective of the mobile sector.
Sally, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, when we look at ITU, specifically within the context of ITUR, the real question is, should the Internet be brought under the ambit of the ITU in general and ITUR in particular? So to answer the question, I think you have to really identify, in my mind, 4 main issues that have really developed since the whole ITUR process began, which is that networks today have moved from the public domain to the private domain. 85 to 90% of all networks are private and run by private operators and not by the public PTT. And so therefore there's been a fundamental shift in terms of the balance, if you will, of influence. Secondly, it's very clear that the shift has gone from voice to data, and that in the future we will see networks that are more data-oriented than they are voice-oriented, which was the paradigm when ITU started up. The third thing is that, as Mr. Ramnarayan said, the Internet is here to stay, and that is a significant new development that has happened since the whole previous discussions under ITUR took place. And finally, the point to be made is that the rate of change in technology is stupendous. I think there was a statistic released this morning which said that Facebook took approximately 10 years to reach 500 million. It took only 5 years to reach 1 billion. So the rapidity of technological change is just stupendous. So if you put all of those 4 things in context, I think the perspective, the answer to the question from the operator's perspective is that ITUR is not the place to be managing the Internet, because one, the whole logistics and the decision-making process under ITUR is so formal and necessarily so perhaps, but under a rapidly changing technological imperative, I think we'd be left far behind, and I don't think ITUR is the appropriate mechanism and the format and the context to deal with such a rapidly changing environment. Secondly, I think when you look at the whole nature of ITUR, as Sally pointed out, it is not just recommendatory. Anybody who's signing it does have to toe the line. So from the private operator's perspective, given the challenges ahead in terms of where we're headed and the dynamics in terms of the changes that are coming in terms of the network topography, I think it would be difficult, or I think countries would be giving up a great deal of their sovereign rights to be coming under the ITUR framework. So that is a matter of concern for us, that the governments, as part of their treaty obligations, will be mandated, if in a sense, once they sign up. So that's a matter of concern to the private operators, who have increasingly very little role, if you will, in an ITU. Although we participate, ultimately it's the government that makes the decision in terms of what, quote-unquote, the government position is. And so, although it may be enlightened under one jurisdiction, that's not always the case that it will continue to be enlightened in subsequent jurisdictions. So there is that concern that we have. we believe that also issues of control and security ought also to be left to much more of a bilateral type of an issue between countries, because the whole understanding of free speech and culture is very different. I don't think we want to be clubbed along with a China or a Russia, which has a very, very different understanding and a perspective of what free speech rights are and how those are to be controlled and managed. So again, under an ITU regime, I think that would pose a significant difficulty for operators who conduct their business under sovereign licensee, licensor type relationships. So I think those are some of the issues that would be of concern. We'll leave the rest. But let me also suggest that the Internet has been quite adept at what I call self-organizing mechanisms to govern itself and to set standards and to move on. That's what's been shown. You just have to look at Wikipedia. Nobody thought that Wikipedia would be a success, but Wikipedia is a success. eBay is a success, and it happened through collaborative, means and processes. I think we've learned on the Internet environment to be able to do that quite efficiently and effectively. And I think taking it out of the realm of that principle of self-organization and organizing principles and put it onto a much more formal protocol under ITUR, I think would be a big mistake from the industry's perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Matthews. We're going to turn now to Dr. Michael Kende, who's a partner at Analysis Mason. A question for you that's come up in the context of the wicket is the extent to which the Internet is sustainable, the extent to which the ITRs or a treaty-like mechanism is necessary in order to keep the Internet going. I know that you've done some work in this area and some analysis. It would be interesting to get your take from an economic perspective on that.
Okay, thank you, Sally. And the context that comes up in is that the last ITRs introduced or refined the accounting rate regime that governed the flow of money when international calls were made, that the calling network paid a certain amount, the settlement to the called network, and that was in part to help fund the development of the networks, and obviously at the time and has been very successful in increasing the penetration of telecom networks. So some have used this new opportunity of the wicket and the ITRs being negotiated to say, let's do the same for the Internet, that, as Sally said, the Internet might not be sustainable, and that these funds could be used to help fund the development of infrastructure. So just going back in history, fears about the sustainability of the Internet are not new. The Internet was effectively commercialized in 1995. Within a year, Bob Metcalfe, the founder of, or the inventor of Ethernet, was declaring that the Internet was about to undergo a catastrophic collapse because of the traffic from Netscape and the first browsing traffic. Obviously, that turned out not to be the case. Then later on, when YouTube came along and all the video traffic and peer-to-peer came along, people started fears of the exaflood, that all this traffic was unsustainable and the Internet was going to collapse again. That didn't happen. Today, now people are saying, look at mobile. Internet is now going all over the world. There's this increase in demand from untold millions and billions of users. The Internet's not sustainable. But what happened in each case and what's happening today is a huge adaptation. First, new technologies invented to increase capacity through new access networks. So we went from dial-up to DSL to LTE to cable networks and fiber. In the backbone, in the long haul, we have dense wavelength division multiplexing so that you can get more and more capacity out of the same fibers. And then there was an enormous amount of investment. And if you look at investment, it really spiked in response to those increases in demand. There was, of course, the first Internet bubble after the commercialization and the first wave of browsing. And then there was another wave of investment in response to all the video. And arguably now there's a spike, but it's heading for developing countries as operators are starting to find that there's more profit there, that those are growing markets, money is flowing to developing countries. So huge increases in capacity based on investment and technology. Also, more and more content is portable. It's not just phone calls between people that have to originate in one place and terminate in the other. Up to 98% of internet traffic today is portable. That is, it's created in one place, it's put on the internet, and then it can be stored in a cache somewhere else, in a server somewhere else, so that it's not always going through the internet. So today, if you look at a video that was developed, let's say in Brazil, you're almost certainly not going to be actually getting it from Brazil. It's not going to go through the whole network. It might have been stored in Los Angeles. It might have been stored in London. It might be stored here in Delhi. So that reduces the amount of capacity that's needed for that traffic. So you have increases in capacity and a much more efficient use of capacity that have responded to every one of these increases in demand successfully, and that's happening today with IXPs all over the world, content delivery networks, Google caches being placed all over the world to help move the traffic around successfully. I think the difference really this time is that there's this wicket, there's this opportunity. There's not a crisis, but an opportunity to, for some, have seized on to see if they can't redirect and decide where the flows of money should go, from the content providers to the networks, or from the developed world to the developing world. And this is, could have some significant downsides for the internet, for the way that the internet's developed, for the way that content is being made available. And just in the interest of time, in the red folders, there's a CD-ROM of a paper that was recently released and launched here several days ago, talking about how the internet is working, why these new proposals might be not just are unnecessary, but might actually harm the development of the internet in the very countries that they're meant to help. And I have another paper coming out next week that says, instead of this, look at the sustainability, look at how the internet keeps growing, and this is what is likely to happen, that they'll continue this growth, this innovation, this new business models for delivering traffic, and that's going to fuel the next wave of development and investment in the internet.
Thank you, Michael. I'll now turn to Dr. Upal, who's the Senior Advisor from the Internet Service Providers Association of India, to give us the perspective of the ISP community on the upcoming wicket and the ITRs.
Thank you, Sally. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to speak to you. I think Internet, as we are all aware, touches billions of people, and people that we never even imagined it would touch are now touched, and people who users that we never imagined that Internet could be put to are now possible, and not just possible, a very large variety of people, rich or poor, abled or less abled, different communities, different types of people are able to use this. So it's a huge, huge hit, way beyond the expectations of people who wrote it. But I think it is fair to say, and I doubt if anybody here would disagree, that Internet is not perfect. And there are things wrong. Clearly, cybercrime is an issue, and thank you. Cybercrime is an issue. It's probably increasing. Is spam an issue? By all means, everyone would agree it is. Is other kinds of abuse real? Yes, it is. Is there any sign of its abatement? I'd say probably not. Is traffic an issue? Clearly it is. Traffic are issues about network neutrality all settled? No. Have we really addressed the issues of wireless players? Yes and no, we haven't. Now, clearly, is roaming not a consumer concern? It is a concern. There's widespread talk about abuse of roaming and all kinds of issues there. So I don't think it can be anybody's case that there is nothing to be fixed. But what is certainly a concern is what is the nature of solutions we are looking for and who those solutions must be provided by. And I think the problem with ITRs is that it attempts to do so in a manner which I think we would all, I would at least argue, is very, very problematic. And the reasons for this is that some of the reasons I would suggest are that the kind of issues that we are talking about are very, very specific issues. They are technical issues. They are issues of politics. There are issues of safety, security, and a whole lot of other issues. And I think they deserve to be dealt with seriously. And my concern is that ITU is nowhere near the agency which can deal with these issues. It does not seem to have the level of expertise. It certainly doesn't have the kind of experience that is relevant to this exercise. And I think, given our experience in the Internet, it doesn't seem to even have the brand that will inspire the confidence that ITU will get it right. And I think that, to me, is a serious issue. And I think one of the primary concerns, or at least concerns in the formulation of the problem itself that I have, is that the argument is that there is a huge difference in the telecom environment of the 80s, in 1988, when the first ITRs, the current ITRs were came into operation, and now that the biggest change in the environment, obviously, is the increasing role of the private sector, and a very, very conspicuous exit of government players across the world. And if that is really the case, then to argue somehow that the response to this ought to be the entry of government agencies to deal with it, it seems to me to be in itself incongruous. I think we do need a different kind of expertise to deal with this. I mean, if the idea is to address the issues arising out of increasing private sector participation and the kind of concerns that we have, then clearly the responses needed to be slightly different. Now, and I think, as my friend Mr. Matthews also pointed out, I think not only is the role of ITU in this situation, and I must confess I have worked with the ITU in the past, and I have great respect for a lot of its roles, and have enjoyed working with them. And however, the kind of exercise that the ITU would end up being a part of seems to be very, very worrying. And I think what is more worrying to me is the kind of liabilities that Mr. Matthews also referred to, the new liabilities it is creating for governments that will then be signatories to the new proposals. And I think that is something that we need to be concerned about. Many of the issues that sort of underlie or are behind the scenes the reasons for the ITRs, the new version of the ITRs, whether it's cybercrime, cyber security, whether it is a whole range of other kinds of abuse, are issues that the ISPs in India routinely face and are routinely asked to address and routinely find themselves relatively unhappy with the way they are expected to address them, because these are very, very difficult issues. And they also have a view that many of these kinds of interventions that the ISPs are being asked to make, for instance, the wholesale blocking of sites, etc., could perhaps be done. I mean, we're not particularly questioning the need or otherwise of such blocking, but certainly are best done at a different level, mainly maybe at the gateway level in this country. And so the point again is that something which is as real as the kind of problems ISPs are dealing with, and they do exist solutions which actually are far simpler, far specific, and to me, more importantly, far more proportional to the kind of problems we are dealing with. Because I think the challenge in regulation, in my view, is that we not only need to get a solution, but get a solution which is specific, effective, and proportional. And I do believe that ITRs are not that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Upal. I will turn now to Mr. Eric Loeb, who's the Vice President of International External Affairs for AT&T. Eric, you come from both a U.S.-based company but an international company, have been very involved in the International Chamber of Commerce as well. So maybe you can bring that perspective to this discussion.
Very pleased to be here, and thanks, Sally. Well, as I start, and after hearing 4 excellent remarks already, I'm reminded of a saying we have in D.C., particularly in Congress: everything has been said, but not everyone has said it. So, for the things that I agree with, I will return my time for the audience for questions. Some excellent points have been made. First, a word about the work that I do beyond AT&T. As Sally mentioned, I chair the Task Force on Internet and Telecommunications with the International Chamber of Commerce, and that is a wonderful institution. 120 countries participate. It is a voice of global industry, and in doing that, I've learned so much in the consensus building process, even within industry, and that's not as complex as the full multi-stakeholder process. But nonetheless, when you bring together not just the telecom industry, but all of our customers, the business users that rely on telecoms, and the other participants in the ICT ecosystem, to be able to get to a consensus position within that group, there's a lot you have to balance and a lot you have to work through. And there's been great interest in the ICC in this process from the private sector. I want to say a couple things before I talk about the ITRs, about the ITU, because sometimes in this conversation running up to Wicket, there's been a lot of disparagement about the ITU itself. And that's unfortunate, and it misses the point. We need to remember, as we talk about the appropriate role of the ITRs, and particularly with this topic of the panel, will the ITRs impact Internet governance, that the ITU remains a critical institution and very valuable for all the work we do. Several people who are here actually just came from an important convening event, something that the ITU uniquely does. That's the Global Symposium of Regulators, that's focused on the important issues of how do you help, particularly from the development sector, connecting the unconnected. It does a brilliant job at that. In the radio sector, it is the place where global coordination and harmonization of spectrum can be done, and that is one of the most critical issues when we do talk about connecting the unconnected, of ensuring that in the next tranches of spectrum allocations it's well harmonized. So as we have this conversation about the ITRs, let's not confuse and simplify concerns we may have about Internet and the importance of the ITU. Now, I'd like to say a couple things. When the ITRs last were revised, as mentioned before, in 1988, the world was entirely different. We were talking primarily about one country, one carrier, pre-liberalization, pre-competition, private sector investment decisions for the most part. And so there was a very different context where countries came together to agree at a government-to-government level how telecommunications should be exchanged on a cross-border basis. A starting point as we go into this revision process is to think about what is the environment in which we're looking at now. It's far from that. Liberalization has been a phenomenal success. Just look at India. What has driven mobile expansion in 1994 from, I think, 4 million users to over 900 million users now? It has been competition. It has been private sector investment. And those two words, competition, more than two words, competition, private sector investment, they are not in the current ITRs in any place. And that's an important starting point for reference when we talk about the Internet. Because sometimes with issues, you can have regulation and you can have regulatory restraint. That is a policy decision. That is a policy decision that governments can make. All right? And regulatory restraint has been the source of phenomenal success, unprecedented success, where you have competition, where you have private sector investment. And the Internet has evolved rapidly. It has adjusted rapidly. It has been done in a multi-stakeholder process where if there are engineering challenges, you have an engineering task force that looks at it and works on these things, such as traffic routing issues. If you have challenges with the commercial sustainability or viability for how you exchange traffic and pay for it, those have been worked out in a commercial setting. And it has succeeded quite well. As I said before, it's not perfect. It's not without challenges. But you have to think about that, what has worked and what has been the environment for it before, and this is where we get to the panel topic, will the ITRs impact Internet governance? Well, they clearly have the strong potential to. Because if you look at some of the proposed provisions, which address issues such as how should traffic be routed, how should traffic be paid for, compensated with particular models, if you replace the current commercial flexibility, engineering flexibility that has been very organic and rapidly changing, arising to new challenges, and replace that with a top-down mandate first established in a treaty document and then implemented perhaps in one way, perhaps in 193 different ways through government regulation, you change very much both the conversation as well as the means by which these important issues of the Internet, and let's not forget the development of the Internet to continue to connect the unconnected, would be resolved.
Thanks very much, Eric. Now I want to turn to Mr. Kiran Chandra, who's the General Secretary of the Free Software Movement of India, importantly bringing a civil society perspective into this discussion. We've had a government and industry and economics analysis, but now I think it's important to hear from the civil society as well.
Thank you, Sally, and ladies and gentlemen. And from the discussions, I see that there is an attempt to argue that Internet should be kept outside the ambit of ITU. I would argue that content, IP addressing, protocols, technical aspects of design, deciding standards, etc., should essentially kept outside the purview of ITU. But even till date, the medium of communication or the medium of way the way the Internet is delivered through wired or wireless telecommunications. Hence, the role of ITU should be limited in handling the details of the physical layer and deciding on the issues such as settlements and net neutrality. Because the physical layer is the bottom layer, and still till date, and it is the wired and wireless telecommunications that operate, and the role of ITU should be limited to that, and remaining all aspects cannot be put in the purview of the ITU. And essentially, also, physical infrastructure consists of the underlying copper wire and optical fibers, terrestrial wireless and satellite communications, and etc. So, and also, the owners typically are considered to be the telecommunication companies, and they tend to be the natural monopolies. And once the telecommunication companies tend to be the natural monopolies, therefore the physical layer is an obvious candidate for regulatory oversight and intervention. Once there is a monopolization, and we'll have to ensure that there is regulation and there is a regulatory oversight and there is an intervention from the there is proper intervention. And for long, settlements for voice has always been has always been the ambit of ITU. And now, how do we argue that settlement of packets should not be dealt with in the ITU? And particularly when the future itself, the future is going to be a transformation from the PSTN completely to the IP to IPT calling networks, and then internet also tends to become the main carrier of voice. And the issues that are being raised by, for instance, the EU telecom companies, that the sender part pays the settlement for packets, and all these things can be settled in the ambit of ITU, whether one agrees with it or not. And essentially, as a civil society, we don't agree to it. And I don't agree to it, and I don't subscribe to such arguments. But however, these kind of issues can be dealt with under the ambit of ITU. And even if we agree on certain aspects of the internet should be kept out of the ITU, in the context that I was saying, and let us see even the FCC filed by the AT&T, and also some of the US experts like Larry Brown have been writing and saying that what would be the implications of transforming or shifting to an IP to IP based networks. It only implies that ITU should be wound up, and it has no role, as the future of the internet will be governed only by a bottom up and does not need multilateral governance. And you see, in a situation when the whole telecom moves to an IP based system, we have a certain set of gains in the kind of a multilateral agreement that we have, such as the universal service obligation, which tend to be there, where there is an obligation on the part of the service providers where there is connectivity given. And such egalitarian concepts and also should also be transformed in a case or a situation when things move towards such a trend. And also, ITU, it does not come into the content. Once we say that it cannot come into the content, then how do we deal with the concept of cyber security? Because once you speak about the cyber security, we essentially will have to deal with the aspects of the content also. So, and this is where the question I have is, do we have any other multilateral institutions that address this issue, particularly on the cyber security, cyber veterans, cyber weapons, etc. And also, as individual nations, can we do it? And as Rajan Matthews was pointing it out, can we allow it intrude into the sovereign rights of the nations? And I think we should not, and the rights of the sovereign right of the nation should be always there, and they should have the right to enforce a particular kind of a regulation with them. And also, the openness of the internet, once we all speak here about, it is a matter of technological choice that is achieved through its layered architecture and open protocols and the governance policies. So the accompanying regulatory regime can affect this openness, both positively and negatively. And though it is, and as I have said, though it is the right of the sovereign governments to regulate or not to regulate the internet, there could be global norms that could be worked out, and ITU also could be a platform for creating, or ITRs could be a platform for creating global norms, but they cannot be the places where you have binding agreements. Because once we have a binding agreements, they intrude into the sovereign rights of the nations, and also the issues and the different cultures that exist. And the threat to openness of the internet, it essentially does not come only from the governments, and it also comes from the telecom companies that bundle the access to internet with a certain set of features being only given to the telecom packages, which essentially affect very badly on the neutrality of the internet. And I've been told, and we are not aware of the proposals, particularly the ethno proposals and the preferentially private agreements, where you have a preferential transmission mechanism that is being argued, and such kind of a proposals cannot be accepted, and the government of India should essentially not allow any such of the things which would affect the net neutrality. And the last point I would like to make is that ITU itself is relatively a closed body, and the government of India, which is making its submissions to the ITU, has not involved or called for an open meeting where it takes the opinions of the civil society. Listening to industry is not just sufficient. Industry is only a component in the whole society, and there's a huge amount of civil society that exists, and the internet is not only consumed by the industry, it is consumed by the civil society, and there's a popular culture that is built around it. And the government of India, it's a failure on the part of the government of India, and we strongly advocate that the government of India should come out with an open meetings involving the civil society, and if you could just come out with an argument saying that we have taken care of this, we are addressing all these issues. It is we who need to judge, or the civil society, the citizens of India who need to judge. If you have done it, we'll be happy, but let us see into that. If you have not done it, listen to our comments. And it is only then a treaty, or while going for a submission for a treaty where we have a direct implication on it, and I think the whole of the nation's voice need to be heard. When you speak about a large statement like participatory democracy, begin at least from here. With this, I rest. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and I think that was an important concluding remark of the importance of having full engagement in advance of the conference, so thanks for making that point. Our final speaker for the panel is Mr. Prakash, who's the Policy Director for the Center for Internet and Society, who's quite an expert on issues surrounding the intersection of technology and law, which the WICIT certainly is. So, thank you.
Thank you, Sally. If Eric felt the need to say that everything's already been said before, then I need to say that twice. There's very little for me to add, really. I'll try and outline a few principles that we should keep in mind while thinking about the ITRs. And I must emphasize right now I'm speaking in my personal capacity. We at the Center for Internet and Society are currently studying whatever documents are available publicly around the ITRs, and we haven't taken a stand on many of them. So I'm speaking in my individual capacity. And I'm very glad also to be in the company of people who have been following telecom issues, because if around a year ago you asked me what WICIT was, I would be thinking about cricket. I would not be thinking about telecom. And some broad principles that I think must be kept in mind in policymaking around the ITRs. The ITU should be a place where, and the ITR specifically should be a place where you put in issues that require international cooperation. This is not the place where you put in stuff that can be dealt with just through national regulation. This is stuff necessarily that requires international cooperation. International roaming price transparency, for instance, I think is very much an issue that requires international cooperation. Many of the other things that are being proposed aren't. Technical issues around telecommunications is what the ITR should be about. So around security, there are multiple proposals from a whole lot of different stakeholders. And if it is about network security and in a sense limited to that, then the ITU might be the right place for it. ITU already does some amount of standard setting work around network security. However, if it is about things such as security of root server operations or of DNS, or about security in the sense of criminal activities over telecommunications networks, those are not, the first set that I mentioned are not things that the ITU should be looking at. And the second things are not technical issues. Those aren't things that the ITU should be looking at either. So, but in the proposals that have been submitted before the ITU, the draft proposals, this distinction is not made clear. In a number of them, when you read through them, it's not very clear what kind of security they're talking about. The ITR should be something where issues that involve states should be put in. Multi-stakeholder issues should not end up at the ITU, which is not a multi-stakeholder body. Importantly, if something's being revised in the ITRs right now, there must be some kind of proven problem. What we find is that, to take one example, the ethno proposal, for instance, does not make it very clear why they think that the current interconnection system is a problem. In their proposal, they talk about fair compensation, they talk about sustainable development of telecommunications networks, but it's not clear that right now that there is a problem to be fixed. Okay. Jeff Houston, for instance, gives an example, talks about how 10 years ago, content providers were asking for fair compensation by saying, on the internet, if we didn't put out content, then all the people, all the ISPs, etc., would not have any need to exist. We're putting out that content very often for free, okay? Whereas customers are paying the ISPs to gain access to that content. So the ISPs should be sharing revenues with the content providers. Now that was the argument 10 years ago, and right now, for instance, in India, Airtel a few months ago made the argument that we're providing connectivity and companies like Google and Facebook are free riding on us, okay, apart from the fact that they are actually paying for connectivity. But that's the sense that Airtel gives, right, that these content providers are free riding now, and they need to share revenues with us. Now, the fact of the matter is, the system right now doesn't really seem to be broken. There could be a case to be made out that it's broken, but that case hasn't been made out. Okay, so we must keep that in mind. From the perspective of developing countries, Rohan Samarajiva of Learn Asia puts out a very compelling case for why the ethno proposal would be bad for developing nations. And the ethno proposal, just in brief, one of the things it touches upon is saying that wherever possible, you must use a sender network party pays principle. Okay. And that might, from the perspective of developing countries, seem like a good thing because very often we are consumers. So if the sender has to pay to get content over to, say, to places like Africa or India or Bhutan, etc., then it might seem like a good thing. These guys don't have to pay. But what if this leads to unintended consequences, such as deciding to take routes that don't go through developing countries, deciding not to provide certain kinds of services in developing countries just because it ends up being expensive. Okay. Now, the fact of the matter is, none of these, is there any good economic analysis that's been done? Okay, so we don't really know what all this, a fundamental shift like this will lead to. And when we don't know, we should stick to what already exists, I'd say, and unless you can show that there is a problem. The ISOC paper, for instance, does a really good job of explaining both the current system and why the ethno proposal won't really help and will make things worse for internet companies and for developing countries. And so I've gone through a few principles. One more principle would be that if after having satisfied all these tests, okay, that there is no better place than the ITU to deal with these issues. Because for many, if an existing organization like ICANN or IETF or others are already looking at certain issues, then ITU isn't necessarily the best place to be talking about this. Then finally, after having satisfied all these principles, if we come to the conclusion that regulation is required at ITU, then the question moves to what kind of regulation, whether it should be mandatory or not, whether it's the minimal amount of regulation required to achieve the policy objectives. And this is, and I won't, since there isn't too much time, so I won't get into substantive principles that these regulations should embody, such as principles of development, such as principles of competition and prevention of monopolies, etc. So I'd just like to mention a few things in closing. India has, while specifically on the ITRs and WICIT, India has not taken a public position as yet, as far as I know, but it has taken a public position on this issue before. If you look at the IPSA statement on enhanced cooperation from December 2010, you'd see them saying that the IPSA reaffirms its commitment to the stability and security of the Internet as a global facility based on full participation of all stakeholders from both developed and developing countries within their respective roles and responsibilities in line with paragraph 35 of the Tunis Agenda. Sorry for reading all of that out, but paragraph 35 of the Tunis Agenda basically talks about multi-stakeholderism in issues that relating to technical and public policy issues relating to the management of the Internet. So India has taken a position on this before, along with Brazil and South Africa in the statement. Okay. And conclusion, I'd say I'd completely agree with Eric that the current demonization of ITU is not good. That we must recognize the ITU it was one of the core organizations behind even the WSIS process, right? So the ITU has a role to play in the larger sphere of Internet governance. We must be more focused in terms of the specific proposals before the ITU currently, whether those are good, whether the ITU is the right place for those proposals, and our criticism and from civil society, there has been some amount of demonization of the ITU, and I don't believe that's good. And lastly, I'd like to again emphasize what Kiran said in terms of transparency. We've signed a global letter asking for the ITU to be more transparent. Here in India, we're asking the Indian government to be more transparent in terms of holding stakeholder feedback sessions for what their position is going to be. And I'd just like to end on that note. Thank you.
Well, thank you. This has been I think a very fruitful and constructive discussion, and I want to first just thank the panelists for that. We have very limited time, and I'm sure a lot of questions. I'm going to turn first to Parminder Singh, who has a comment to make. I'd like to at least get maybe 2 other questions in if we can manage to do it, and then we'll have to wrap up the panel for the next discussion. But Parminder, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Sally. I know the time is short. I think we still, being so close to the final meeting, are talking at very high-level issues, and the differences are very high level, and that's unfortunate. I think we should have been onto the level of the details at this point. When I hear panelists, almost everybody agrees that much has changed since 1988, and the main change is that there is internet, and increasingly there's convergence, and probably there would only be the internet. Now, if that is true, and if somebody has a contention, then the ITRs, and it's obvious therefore ITRs have to change because everything has changed. And now if there's no internet in the ITRs, then I more or less think the ITU should fold up, because, and we are at that higher level, and we have not gone below to, actually analyzing the internet as Kiran did, and some others who, Mr. Ram Narayan said that there are many layers in which should be dealt with. And very quickly, 4 points. One, we all agree the big thing, elephant in the room, is whether ITU will take over the ICANN, ITF kind system. And I think there is an agreement that those kind of protocols should stay out. And we all almost agree here that we are not trying to get ITU anywhere close to that. And that's 1 point. The second point is of definitions. And I think definitions, while there's a kind of shadow boxing on definitions, we have to be going to the real issues, because internet factually is a part of certain kind of telecom facilities. We can't give positions on the definitions at ITU which we may not actually be doing in India. We have to figure out how do we actually divide internet within India, which layer is dealt by which ministry, what is our long-term plan. Just because there is a reactive stance to certain agendas being set up internationally, we can't change the internal stance. And I think that's the deep analysis of real issues which would go into definitions. And we are touching the core definitions. The same definitions would later come to haunt the national scenes. People will come to say that, okay, the ITR says this is internet and this is not, and therefore nationally you should also go. And Kiran said that for a country like India, the obligations, telecom regulatory obligations like covering underserved areas, common carriage obligations, costing issues which are regulated remain important, and we therefore just don't allow the definitional issues to make people escape from there. I have other points, but I think I should give chance to some other people to speak. Thank you very much, Sally, for giving me the first opportunity.
Well, thanks. You raised an important point. When you're only given an hour and 45 minutes to discuss a major international treaty, you don't get into the level of detail. But I think you're exactly right. That's the kind of discussion that is needed between now and December, so policymakers can make the right decisions. Like I said, I'd like to take maybe 2 other questions if I can. I have a gentleman in the back of the room.
Oh, thank you, Sally. So 2 points when we heard about what the debate about the ITR.
Could you identify yourself?
Oh, sorry, Vikram Tivatia, COAI. So from the COAI, we've submitted a paper to the government, but we haven't heard of the government position, right? So there was a gentleman like Pranesh and Kiran was mentioning, what's the transparency in coming to a consensus India position. So we really hope that the government would be putting out a public consultation document where all of us can actually participate. Because just to remind the House that at the ITU, it is the government that speaks. The reality is industry owns the networks. So how do you marry these two up? All right, and that is a major shift that has happened since the last, when the last ITRs were crafted, because in crafting that itself would have been the period before that. So government networks are now out and private networks are in. So the current ITR must reflect that position.
Thanks for that comment. I'll take one more from the floor, and then I'm going to, we'll wrap this up. But are there any other questions or comments? We've answered all the questions. Highly successful panel. I would just perhaps turn to the Deputy Director General if he had any closing comments you'd like to make, or are you all set?
I think a lot of things have been said. And there is, as far as the consultation is concerned, I think some consultation has taken place, and government, whenever it, because as I said, this issue has been heated up only in the recent past. For quite some time, all nations have been sleeping. In fact, I think we should have woken up 1 or 2 years back and should have come out with something. Because now we are fighting against the time to deliberate on this issue and what could be done. And the way the world seems to be polarized now, I'm not even sure whether in the current wicket we will be able to take any concrete decision or not. This is my personal hunch, because too much polarization is there on this issue. And the time is too short to make a consensus, and unless consensus is there, as IT works on consensus, I'm not sure whether any decision would be made or not. So if you want any decision to be made, better we go fast, join our heads and find out a solution to this vexed problem.
Okay.
So this concern is emerging from, last experience of ours where this United Nations proposal really got into consideration and limelight, and we started hearing people from all over the world talking about it, and then we got to know about it in India, and it was very embarrassing for us. I don't want, that I request that such kind of embarrassment should not take place. That's all. That is, in case some consultation has taken place, it is not posted on the website. First of all, I'm not even aware of that consultation. But yes, must be. When you are saying it, definitely there has to be. If the paper can be posted so we people can give some viewpoint, would be my request to you, sir. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank everybody, and I think the good news is that you've heard from the community that there's a lot of interest and a lot of willingness to work with the government to develop the position. So I think that that's a constructive outcome of this discussion, and thanks everyone for your attention.